What does this vision invoke to you? Do you see a simple green man of vegetation? Do you see something symbolic with an oak and an oak leaf cluster that makes up his guise? His green eyes? The Celtic symbology rolling around over his head. The idea of Yggdrasil. Concept of Odin and the world tree, and you see the roots here below it with runes that are attached to it. Join me as we unravel another piece of the puzzle of where actually the Bible comes from and its paganistic type roots. This is a very deep one, and one that seems to come from the elder times, way before we normally speak of. In fact, in a time before time itself, as we look at it. I personally believe this comes before the end of the last ice age and the Younger Dryas by tens of thousands of years. The truth behind the Christ myth, ancient origins of the often used legends. What is the origin of the legend of the Christed Son who was born of a virgin on December 25th? Christed means anointed by way, in a special oil that was used. I'm sure you're familiar with this legend, which states that he was born in a manger surrounded by shepherds and then grew up to be one with his Father in heaven. Most certainly, you recall the sequence of events when this Christed Son gathered together his important 12 disciples before enduring his death by torture and his subsequent resurrection. And finally, there's the scene at the end of this time on earth when he's prophesied to return and then ascend into heaven, this Armageddon that we've talked about before. Now for my question to you, who amongst you is now mumbling under his or her breath that this can only be the legend of the Christians, Jesus Christ? Well, to the rest of you, I'd like to inform you that many years before the birth of Jesus Christ, a legend identical to this was the accepted life story of the Persian son of God, Mithras. And before Mithras, a very similar legend was ascribed to various other sons of God worldwide, or the known world, and it spread. Just like vegetation, just like agriculture. In fact, it was the people that did so that brought that, including the Greek Dionysus, the Egyptian Osiris, the Sumerian Dumuzzi, and the Hindu Murugan. In fact, we keep going back in time many thousands of years earlier, we'll discover that this universal legend actually began with the Green Man, the son of a virgin goddess who was born, died, and finally resurrected, but he did so each and every year. You think this has nothing to do with the Christ myth, but we celebrate it and do it again every year. During the Neolithic Age, which was the era, as some say, back whenever God was a woman, the goddess and her son, the Green Man, were venerated by people worldwide for annually bringing forth the earth's material abundance, all the crops and things, many of which happened naturally, as if it was all a Garden of Eden. A universal legend about them arose that began with the annual impregnation of the Virgin, Earth Goddess, by the Son, the Father in heaven, and the subsequent birth of her son, the Green Man. This also has zodiacal connections with Virgo and the Sun in Virgo and so on. But doesn't that have to do with Armageddon? Well, of course, there's a beginning and an end. And in this story, they still keep those connections to this day in a strange way. This important event occurred annually at the time of the winter solstice, when the spirit of the green man that had been slumbering underground in the underworld was shaken back to life. But although this dormant spirit had been stirred, it was not yet fully awake. This did not occur until a few days later, 3 to be exact, on December 25th, when the sun or solar spirit completely reversed its downward path of 1 degree per day and took measurable steps along a northerly route. Many of you know the story that we're getting at here, but a lot of people had the same stories that we have today, just a different interpretation. This was an important as above, so below event, connecting us to the heavens and earth and all the things in between. And we've shown that that comes from the Wayback Machine. Led to sacred geometry and all the things that have led up to our modern day. It was believed that the renewed and revitalized solar spirit, that sun, in the heavens had reawakened and revitalized the spirit of his son below and inside the earth. And now the future green man could begin his annual gestation period with the womb of his mother, the virginal earth, in anticipation of receiving a new resurrected body in the spring. This is just an agricultural type of myth where you're talking about how the seasons change and eventually all the grass grows back green. It's really an evergreen tale too. We'll get into that deeper. This is a multi-parter, and each successive part will be in your top left-hand corner. Here's a depiction of Green Man. It's made out of a giant tree. His growing hair in elder age becomes antlers, which we just see as bare stalks and goes away and then comes back. It's usually done with a sacred oak. Legend of the goddess and green man then skips into the vernal equinox, when the green man is ready to finally emerge from the womb of his mother, and this is the time when the male light equals the female darkness, and their male-female polarity fully unites to produce a fresh infusion of the life force to cover and fertilize the land. This happens in the rites of spring that we know of, whenever through the winter there's been more night than daylight. Days are getting shorter and shorter. You know this effect. But at the spring equinox, it becomes equal and then greater for the sun. The sun rises to another level, esoterically and in reality. And so at that point, there is the same amount, 12 and 12 hours worth of day, but it overcomes it, goes through the entire summer, and then falters down through a quick life, which can be seen in 1 year's time, versus the normal human clock, which is based on about 72 years, believe it or not, which is a sacred geometry year and 1 tick of that great year and the greater clock. The fetal body of the green man is now ready to push out of the womb of his mother earth in the form of new tender sprouts of spring. This is a way of teaching people, even at young ages, the birds and the bees and the way it all works, because it surrounds you all like the Force. Soon his annual resurrection will be complete, and this will occur on or around the same day as our Easter, and a modern holiday associated with the much more recent resurrection of another son of a virgin that we know about. But the legend of the Green Man then covers the hot summer months when the sun rapidly matures. As the rapidly maturing vegetative growth of nature, he matures so fast, in fact, that the Green Man can not only become one with his Father in heaven, but even symbolically mates with and inseminates his own mother. I know, let me get to the idea of this and the esoteric knowledge. Their cohabitation produces a second infusion of crops of the fructifying life force on earth and manifests as a second proliferation of vegetation and accompanying harvest. Ultimately, this event would serve to hasten the Green Man's demise, and soon he would die. Again, the decaying vegetation and the falling leaves of autumn. The cause of his death? Well, the sacerdotal interpreters of legend would later assert that it occurred because of the sins of humanity. It was believed that through the original sin of humanity, he had given up not only his own right, but the right to all life and to earth and to achieve eternal life. So in these god and goddesses stories we go in, and I've referred to this in a few different ways, but it keeps going on to this idea of gods and goddesses getting together and siblings and so on. But you understand the way that this works esoterically is if they're the only gods and they have to god to make a god to make a god, then they're the ones that make it happen. Just like secretly we have an idea of Adam and Eve and their kids and stuff, and then where did everybody else come from? Well, it would have to have been from inbreeding. And we would have actually never gotten here if that was the effect. It's more of a symbolic two people. But ironically, there's two people there, there's two people there, there's two people there, and over that hill there's hundreds more, and way over there there's a lot more too. During any time that we're talking about, although it did get shut down quite a bit at the Younger Dryas event that we've talked about, but it's not for this video. Let's continue. By the way, just like he's an evergreen, everborn son that continues, and every year, and this keeps happening, it happens in your life, you have a grandfather, their grandfather and grandmother had sex. Yeah, I know. And they had your parents. Well, one half of them and the other half had their own. And that, it's hard to believe, but your parents actually had a special hug one time, and here you come too. And we all come out the womb of a mother no matter what goes on here. And we have this sacred earth mother that it just happens. She has the eggs of life it happens in. Well, this second coming, too, is the sowing of seeds. Instead of the natural spring plants that come and bring you the early thing that you can even plant for it, too, it's the symbolic secondary seeds and the great harvest. And that great harvest is going to actually take you through winter, through death, and around again. And here we go around. At the close of this Neolithic age, when the civilization arose in place of a purely agrarian or agricultural people, the ancient legend of the goddess and Green Man expanded and took on religious overtones. It became a standard myth that was annually recited and dramatically staged in the temples and the mystery schools of the new fledgling cities, nations, and empires. As far back as we look, this concept was there. It was an underlying concept everywhere. Osiris. But the Sumerians we often talk about, who predate them just a little bit and came on strong, had an extreme belief in it, and it had to do with Inanna and Dumuzzi, an evergreen tree and regrowth. It's talked about in your Bible as being something bad. They took down a tree and put it inside their house and decorated it up, put a star on top of it and other things. There were gifts and all of that goes along with it. It's quite amazing. An evergreen, immortal plant which sprouts back up. A feature of its evolving storyline was that the Green Man now took on the additional role of king of the world, which he governed under the authority of his Earth Mother, and in some renditions of the legend, Sun was said to have met his death in the fall at the hands of his unscrupulous brother or dark, evil lord. Some see connotations that hook this actually up with Cain and Abel, Osiris and Seth, which is Set, or Seth of the Bible, the son that's not talked about that's born after the fact. Roman 6th century Green Man mosaic in the Great Palace at Istanbul. Ishtar and Tammuz. In the cities of Mesopotamia, the Neolithic legend transformed into the story of the goddess as Inanna, or Ishtar as we know about it more nowadays, who annually gave birth to a green man's son and future king under the name of Dumuzzi or Tammuz. It's in your Bible too as Tammuz. In fact, in one passage they're wondering why the women are mourning at this exact moment in time, and it's because of Tammuz. It was said that Tammuz, or Dumuzzi, grew up to mate with his own mother while also governing the earth for her. And people see this in the Semiramis tale. And others, in order that this ancient legend be reflected in their culture, the inhabitants of that fertile crescent, all the way through Egypt, up and around Anatolia, and down the Tigris and Euphrates, which is where Eden was, enthroned rulers of their city-states who were acknowledged to be embodiments of Tammuz, and the royal servants of the goddess Inanna or Ishtar, high priestess, priest kings, and so on, shepherd kings. Here's an extremely old scratched inscription. It's not even well done, from Sumer area here. It tells you it was found in the Maid Palace of Arad. It depicts two almost identical images of a man with a branch or sheaf-shaped head, one lying down, the other standing. It may represent the fertility god Tammuz or similar deity who died in Sumer and was resurrected in spring at this time. It's in the Museum of Israel, but if you'll look, he's got a pine tree on his head. Some have said that's a pine cone, but it looks like a little Christmas tree on his head. Others have made connotations saying that, well, his hands look like weed, and the other depictions down here of this look like that. But if you look at a pine tree, it also has this effect too, and it's an evergreen, and Tammuz is associated with that evergreen tree. In fact, the tale says that he is a tree, that he gets selected as one, and there's a symbolic tree for everybody. This is like the big tree that we have in Times Square, or in your city that you have, that's a major one that they turn on, usually in major cities, but a lot of times in small cities, and in concert, everybody starts to do this along with it. We know this is the Christmas holiday seasons. This is true in Egypt too, where the ruling pharaohs were regarded to be incarnations of Horus, the son of the goddess Isis, and governed under her authority. But in the land of Kemet, although the spirit of the incumbent pharaoh was Horus, his physical body was transformed by Seth, the god who governed the crystallization of energy into physical flesh, and together Horus and Seth, as the twins, created and comprised the physical yin and yang body of the pharaoh, thus making the Egyptian monarchs modern representatives of their first and greatest king, the Green Man, Osiris. Now, what's strange here is that whenever you look at this, the agricultural myth that everybody has, it has to do with the extreme seasons. But when you get down to Egypt and so on, they don't have it anymore. less really in the Middle East or Near Eastern area. It takes you getting up far north above the Tropic of Capricorn or below in the Tropic of Cancer for it to effectively work out. Egypt even had a different time of season of rains bringing floods and so on, because the Nile is fed from so far south that it happens in the off season, and they get that secondary kick as their primary, whereas people in the north get it in a different way. But in that effect, you can still see them catching this secondary rebound. And if you know the way the tail works out, that works out as being the fulfillment of the secondary rebound. Here you can see the great Caucasian Egyptians. I've done a lot of videos about them and things, but that's a green man too, isn't it? Well, here's one for you before I even go farther. I'll throw out a firecracker here real quick. Those Celts had a god that was green man too. He's known as Esus. Yeah. And that derives from Proto-Indo-European, Iesus. And there we have another connective of a green man who was flogged to death on a tree. And I can show you in 2 places in the Bible where it'll tell you that Jesus died on a tree. One time they tell you it was in Egypt. In the Bible. Right now. Like the ancient green man, Osiris was similarly said to die and become resurrected annually in concert with the life and death of nature's vegetation. Osiris's annual resurrection ceremony took place during the annual flood of the Nile River, when the first tender sprouts of nature initially stuck their fragile heads above the surface of the earth. And again, as I just spoke, this was the later season and the secondary season that we're referring to, that the green man is supposed to bring with his fruition of life, leading to another child the next year, and hiccup, and it keeps going and going and going. Semele and Dionysus have connections too. One version of Osiris's popular Egyptian myth had him annually murdered by his jealous and evil brother Seth each fall. This event was reflected in the legends of Osiris's counterpart in Greece, this green man Dionysus, who was annually slain by his relatives, the evil Titans, but later resurrected again. Similar to the green man Osiris, the mother of Dionysus was an earth goddess named Semele, meaning earth, and his father was Zeus, that's that sky father in heaven. Strange side note here, whenever you hear about the Greeks and all they talked about, they told you about these people that lived out the far different areas, and they called them Ethiopians with AE in the very front of it. No, these aren't the Ethiopians you're knowing of now that are an admixed people living in Abyssinia, which name has been changed to Ethiopia, but in many places at the time. And through the Iliad and the Odyssey, they talk about it quite a bit. But when the Greeks speak of them, they tell you that they have 2 gods that they really only go with, and not really the huge pantheons that others have. That what they have is a sky father, which is this father in heaven, Zeus, that we have, and a resurrection god, which we are talking about here constantly. But if you think about it, the Old Testament is that sky father book, and then the New Testament is what? So aren't we not embracing the thing that began everything in the first place, ran through this fruition, encompassed as one, and is back together as one? Boom. In order to awaken Dionysus from his slumber at the time of winter solstice, female representatives of the goddess would loudly bang pots and pans as they danced their way in ritual procession to the snowy summit of Mount Parnassus, and then after receiving his new set of clothes at the following spring equinox, the divine sun would cavort in nature along with his own reflection, an alter ego, Pan, which was a name meaning the all, as in all of nature. And we still have that idea today. Although the airline's gone, Pan Am, that's a cross. Pan means across. thoroughly. Like Osiris and Dionysus, he became the king of the world, and like his Egyptian counterpart, Dionysus was reputed to have once completely covered the globe while teaching his diverse subjects the art of making, ritual, and consuming wine. And this is the idea of having something like the rod of Aaron, that in his effect, like the effect of Dumuzzi and Inanna, brings about springtime, and wherever he went, flowers seemed to grow and so on. Well, this is an agricultural myth. He is the representative concept of also in the mythology of bringing the idea of agriculture to these other people, and therefore, of course, gardens are growing, and they all get their gardens growing. They harness nature in a better way. Here you can see symbolic Greek art. Only have a few colors here. No, they weren't black. If you look, they all have red hair, but he's got a blonde beard on him. Dionysus, which I've done a video about a long time ago, is actually Dionysa. And this is the Nyasa River, which there were two that were named for that because of his great conflagration all the way from India back into a Greek-type lands. But Dionysa, Jupiter is Deus Pater, Dios Pater. That's the day father, sky father. Again, we have a sun-worshipping cult that's going on like crazy. Wine made from grapes was recognized as the blood of nature, and since Dionysus was all of nature, it was his blood. Thus began the ritual of a holy communion through consuming a body of blood of the divine Son and bread of Ceres, the god of cereal grains, where we get cereal from, but also cereal is happening again and again, like annually. Anu, being the sun god, or the great thing that starts off the Sumerians of the year. That was before they came up with all the other stuff. But I recognized quite a few times here we've made connections with Jesus, Esus. Dionysus had a ritual, though, that you were consuming the blood of life of the earth. Still have that idea in Catholics today. It's not all gone away, like I've said. So now we go to part 2 in your top left-hand corner coming up. Let me know what you think down in the comments as we go on, and we take this to one more level, or a few. We'll see you there.